You won't believe what someone found hidden in an old wedding photo from 1887, a secret that had been hiding for over 100 years, right there in plain sight. Let me tell you this crazy story. So there's this woman named Sarah Chen. She works at a history museum in Chicago. Her job? Looking at old photos all day long. Sounds boring. Right. Most days, it kinda was. She'd been doing this for 15 years, seen thousands of old pictures, serious-looking people in fancy old clothes, farms, soldiers, the usual stuff. But one October morning in 2024, everything changed. Sarah was going through boxes from a family donation. The Williams family had given the museum their old family stuff, photos, papers, all kinds of things from the 1800s. Sarah was scanning everything into the computer, making digital copies so people could see them online. Then she picked up this one photograph, a wedding picture from June 14th, 1887. The back said, Robert and Anna Cooper, Riverside, Illinois. It showed a young couple on their porch, about 20 people standing around them. The bride wore a fancy dress with lace. The groom looked stiff in his dark suit. His hand was on her shoulder. Nothing weird so far. Sarah put it on the scanner. The museum had this amazing new scanner. It could see tiny details you'd never notice with your eyes. She hit the button and waited. The blue light moved across the photo slowly. When it popped up on her computer screen, Sarah started zooming in, just doing her normal routine. Checking the clothes, the building, people's faces. Everything looked normal for the 1880s. Then she saw something behind the wedding group. The front door of the house was open a little bit. Sarah zoomed in closer. Her heart started beating faster. There, carved into the wooden doorframe, was a symbol, a very specific symbol. Sarah recognized it immediately. It was a mark from the Underground Railroad. But wait, that made zero sense. The Underground Railroad stopped in 1865. That's when the Civil War ended, when slavery was abolished. This photo was from 1887, 22 years later. Why would anyone carve that symbol in 1887? Sarah's hands were shaking. She zoomed in even more, stared at it for 20 minutes straight, pulled up pictures from her research files, compared them side by side. There was absolutely no doubt. This was a crossroads marker, a special pattern of lines and curves. It meant, safe house here, we'll help you. But help who? In 1887? Sarah leaned back in her chair, took off her glasses, rubbed her tired eyes. This symbol was carved on purpose. Someone wanted it there, and the photographer had positioned everyone so you could see the open door. She started researching Riverside, Illinois. Turns out, it was a small town about 15 miles from Chicago, started in the 1850s by religious people who hated slavery. During the Civil War, lots of homes there helped escaping slaves, but by 1887, that was all over. Slavery was illegal. Black people were free citizens. Black men could vote. So what was going on? Sarah started searching online about Illinois in the 1880s. What she found made her stomach hurt. After the Civil War ended, things got bad again. Especially in the South, new laws were taking away rights from black people. But even in the North, life was getting harder. Sarah found information about something called debt peonage. Here's how it worked. Companies would promise black workers good jobs, good pay, nice places to live. Lots of these workers were former slaves or their kids. They needed work desperately, so they signed contracts. But it was all a trap. The companies charged them for everything: housing, food, tools, clothes. At crazy high prices, the workers' pay barely covered what they owed. And legally, they couldn't leave until the debt was paid off, which basically never happened. The debt just kept growing. If they tried to leave anyway, they'd get arrested for stealing and breaking their contract. It was slavery with different paperwork. Sarah sat there, thinking hard. Could Robert and Anna have been helping people escape from these contracts? She needed to know more about this couple. The next morning, Sarah came to work with a mission. She'd spent all night researching Robert and Anna Cooper, but information from the 1880s was super hard to find online. She knew they lived in Riverside, got married in June 1887, and Robert worked as a photographer. That detail was important. If he was a photographer, he chose exactly how to set up that shot. He wanted that doorway visible. Sarah needed to find family members who were still alive. people who might have old letters or stories. She called the Riverside Historical Society. A volunteer named Betty answered. She was an older lady whose family had been there forever. The Coopers, Betty's voice crackled on the phone. Oh yes, I know that name. There's a woman named Diana who lives in Oak Park. She's a great-great-granddaughter. Lost her husband a few years ago. She keeps talking about giving us family papers, but hasn't yet. Sarah felt excitement rush through her. Can I have her number? She's particular about strangers calling, Betty said. Let me contact her first. Explain who you are. 2 days later, Sarah was driving through Oak Park. Beautiful old suburb, west of Chicago. Diana's house was a small bungalow with a pretty garden, fall flowers blooming everywhere despite the cold. An older woman answered the door. She looked about 70, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes. Dr. Chen, come in. Betty said, you have questions about my family. Inside, the house was cozy and full of stuff, books everywhere, photos on every surface, stacks of papers on the dining table. Diana led Sarah to the living room. Betty mentioned you found a wedding photo of Robert and Anna, Diana said. I'd love to see it. I don't think I've ever seen their wedding picture. Sarah opened her laptop and turned it around. Diana leaned forward, studying the image. That's their house, she said softly. It got torn down in the 1950s for a shopping centre, but I've seen drawings of it in family papers. Look at Anna. She was beautiful. Diana, Sarah said carefully, I need to show you something. Something strange. She zoomed in on the doorframe, showed her the carved symbol. Diana's face changed instantly, a flash of recognition. Then she got very calm and controlled. You know what this is, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Diana was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car drove by. The sound faded away. Finally, she got up and walked to a big wooden cabinet. My grandmother told me stories, Diana said. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old leather folder. She was Robert and Anna's granddaughter. When I was young, maybe 10 or 11, she sat me down, told me things about our family, things I needed to know, but things I should be careful about sharing. She came back to her chair with the folder. My grandmother said Robert and Anna were part of something dangerous, that after the Civil War ended, they thought the fight was over, but they learned it had just changed shape. Sarah leaned forward, barely breathing. Diana opened the folder. Old newspaper clippings, letters, small photos. Robert was a photographer, like you know. He learned it during the war, taking pictures of battles. When he came back to Illinois, he opened a studio in Riverside. That's where he met Anna. She worked for a church minister doing charity work. Diana handed Sarah a letter. The paper was so old it felt like it might crumble. This is from Anna to her sister, dated 1889. Read it. Sarah carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was tiny and perfect. Dearest Margaret, we helped another one escape last Tuesday. Robert documented it like always, though we must be more careful now. The railroad men are watching more closely. Mr. Jackson came through and warned us. The company hired men to track people who run. They call them criminals for breaking contracts. But you and I know the truth. No contract signed under lies is real before God. We will continue as long as we can. Sarah looked up, her hands shaking. She's talking about helping people escape. In 1889. Not the same underground railroad, Diana said quietly. A new one that helped black workers escape from labor contracts. Contracts that were really just slavery with legal papers. She pulled out another document, an official-looking contract. Robert kept this as proof, Diana explained. It's from a railroad company in southern Illinois. Look at the terms. Sarah read through it. It talked about wages, housing, signing bonuses. All seemed reasonable at first. But the fine print was a nightmare. Workers got charged for housing, food, tools, doctor visits at rates way higher than their pay. The debt piled up every week. The contract said workers couldn't leave until everything was paid, and if they tried to leave, arrested for theft and fraud. It was legal slavery, Sarah whispered. Over the next 2 hours, Diana shared everything. Everything her grandmother had told her, plus all the documents in that leather folder. Robert and Anna had been part of a secret network, a small group in Illinois helping workers escape these terrible contracts. They provided safe houses, fake papers, money for train tickets north to Wisconsin or Michigan. Those states didn't enforce the contracts. They connected people with employers who'd hire them, no questions asked. The carved symbol on their doorframe wasn't random. It was a working signal. In the 1880s and 1890s, people who knew the old codes would recognize it. It meant safety. Robert, being a photographer, put it in their wedding portrait on purpose. As documentation, a way to preserve evidence of their work. But why risk putting it in a photograph? Sarah asked. Anyone could see it. Diana smiled sadly. Look at the photo again. Really look. How long did it take you to notice the symbol? Sarah thought about it. She had a high-tech scanner and specific knowledge about Underground Railroad symbols. To a regular person in 1887, or even today, the pattern would be almost invisible, just another detail in old wood. Robert was careful, Diana continued. He positioned people so the door would be visible, but not obvious. The symbol is there for those who know how to look, hidden in plain sight. Sarah looked at the other photos Diana showed her, family portraits, gatherings, street scenes from Riverside in the 1880s and 90s. In several, she could now spot subtle details, a specific flower on someone's jacket, a hand positioned strangely, background things that seemed innocent but carried secret meaning. Robert documented everything, Diana said. It was his way of making sure. If he and Anna got caught, there'd be evidence. Evidence of why they did what they did. Evidence of the system they were fighting. Were they ever caught? Sarah asked. Diana's face got dark. Not exactly, but in 1891, something happened. Something that forced them to stop for a while. My grandmother didn't know all the details. She said Robert and Anna never spoke about it directly. But from what she pieced together from overheard conversations and letter fragments, someone they were helping got captured. Not by police, by men hired by the railroad companies. She pulled out a newspaper clipping from August 1891. The headline read, "Negro Vagrant Found Dead Near Riverside Station." The article was short and mean, described an unnamed black man found by the railroad tracks, said he was probably just a drifter, no investigation mentioned. My grandmother believed this man was someone Robert and Anna were trying to help, Diana said quietly, and she believed his death was not an accident. Sarah spent the next week buried in research, barely slept. Diana let her photograph all the documents. Sarah started comparing them with old newspapers, census records, historical accounts. The picture that came together was darker than she imagined. Between 1865 and 1900, thousands of black workers got trapped. Historians would later call it debt peonage or convict leasing. In the South, racist laws enforced it openly. In the North, it was more sneaky, predatory contracts, company stores with inflated prices, legal systems that always sided with employers. Sarah found court records from Illinois in the 1880s, dozens of cases where black workers got sued for breach of contract and theft, just because they tried to leave bad jobs. The punishments were harsh: prison, forced labor to pay debts, or being returned to employers under armed guard. What Robert and Anna were doing was helping people break legal contracts. If caught, they could face serious criminal charges, conspiracy, helping fugitives, even theft if they gave money or resources. Sarah knew she needed more than Diana's stories and Robert's photos. She needed to find out what really happened in 1891. Was that death in the newspaper really connected to the Coopers? She went back to the Riverside Historical Society, asked to see local newspapers from summer and fall 1891. Betty helped her with the old microfilm machines. Sarah spent hours scrolling through grainy images of old newspapers. In late July, she found something, a small article buried on page 4 of the Riverside Gazette. Local photographer Robert Cooper has announced the temporary closure of his studio for personal reasons. Customers with pending orders should contact Mr. James Wilson at Wilson Photography in Chicago. The timing was huge, just 2 weeks before that unnamed man was found dead by the station. Sarah kept searching. In September, she found another brief mention. The home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Cooper on Oak Street had a small fire last Tuesday evening. Damage was limited to the back porch and quickly put out by neighbors. The cause is being investigated, though sources suggest an overturned lamp. Sarah sat back, her mind racing. A convenient fire weeks after Robert closed his studio, right after someone connected to them died. It didn't feel like coincidence. She needed to know more about that death. She drove to the Cook County Archives in Chicago, requested death records from August 1891. After 2 days of searching, she found it. An official death certificate. John Doe, colored, approximately 30 years of age. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head. The doctor noted injuries consistent with fall from height or assault. No investigation mentioned, no follow-up. Just another black man dead. His life and death barely worth recording. Sarah knew she was onto something big, but she needed more evidence to connect everything. She returned to Diana's house with copies of the articles and death certificate. Diana listened carefully as Sarah explained everything. "I need to know if your grandmother ever mentioned specific names," Sarah said. "The man who died, did she know who he was?" Diana was quiet for a long moment. Her fingers traced the edge of a photo on her lap. She mentioned a name once, just once, and she made me promise never to repeat it. But I think it's time the truth came out. She took a deep breath. His name was David. That's all I know. Just David. My grandmother said he was young, maybe 25. He'd been working on a railroad line being built through southern Illinois. The company recruited him and about 30 other black men from Mississippi, promised good wages and fair treatment. "What happened?" Sarah asked gently. The promises were lies. They lived in camps, got charged crazy prices for everything, paid wages that barely covered their debts. When David tried to leave, the foreman beat him, added the cost of his training and equipment to his debt. He was trapped. Diana's voice grew stronger. Somehow, David got word out to the church network. A minister in southern Illinois sent a message north. It reached Anna. Robert traveled down to photograph the railroad construction. That was his cover. While there, he made contact with David and several others. Told them how to reach Riverside. "David made it," Sarah said, understanding now. He made it to their house. He stayed for 3 days while Robert and Anna arranged papers and a train ticket to Wisconsin. But someone had followed him or informed on him. Men came to the house, not police, men hired by the railroad company. Robert and Anna said David had already left, that they didn't know where he was going. The men searched the house but found nothing. Diana's hands trembled as she continued. David left that night. Robert and Anna thought he'd gotten away safely. But 2 days later, his body was found by the tracks. My grandmother believed he was caught trying to board the northbound train, killed as a warning to others who might try to escape. Sarah felt chills run through her. And the fire at their house. "A warning," Diana finished. The railroad companies had power, money, connections. They couldn't prove Robert and Anna helped David. But they wanted to send a message. "Stop interfering, or next time it won't just be a porch that burns." "Did they stop?" Sarah asked. Diana looked down at the photos spread across the table. For a while, they were terrified. But my grandmother said that by 1893 they were helping people again. More carefully, more secretly. But they couldn't just stand by while people suffered. Armed with Diana's testimony and the documents, Sarah began a huge project. She reviewed all of Robert's photographs from the 1880s and 1890s, requested access to collections at other Illinois historical societies, said she was researching Robert Cooper's photography work. What she discovered was amazing. Robert had created an entire secret language, hidden in plain sight in his regular photography business. In a portrait of a church minister from 1888, a book on the shelf behind him was positioned to show its spine. The Rights of Labor. In a photo of a riverside street from 1890, a building in the background had a window open at a specific angle. Sarah found a letter from Anna mentioning that an open northeast window meant it was safe to approach the house. Most striking was a series of photos Robert took of railroad construction sites, all across Illinois between 1889 and 1895. Supposedly, these were paid jobs documenting railroad expansion. But looking closely, Sarah noticed something. Robert didn't just photograph structures and machinery, he carefully photographed the workers and their living conditions. In one image from 1891, worker barracks were visible in the background, falling apart structures with no proper ventilation or bathrooms. In another, men worked in dangerous conditions without safety equipment. Robert had framed these to look like simple documentary photos, but they were evidence, visual proof of the exploitation fueling America's industrial growth. Sarah found something else too. In several railroad photos, workers' faces were clearly visible. This was unusual for the time. Usually such photos focused on the structures. Workers appeared as anonymous figures, but Robert made sure to capture individual faces, preserving the humanity and identity of people whose names were rarely recorded. She cross-referenced these photos with letters from Diana's folder. Several men whose faces Robert photographed in 1891 and 1892 were mentioned by name in Anna's letters to her sister. William, Samuel, John, identified as people who had passed through or found their way north. Robert had been documenting the people he and Anna helped, creating a visual record of their existence and courage, and he'd hidden this record in commercial photos. Photos no one at the time would examine closely enough to understand their deeper meaning. Sarah realized she was looking at something unprecedented, a photographic archive of a secret network, one that operated for at least a decade, helping dozens, maybe hundreds of people escape economic slavery. In the years after the Civil War, as winter came, Sarah worked late into the nights, assembling everything she'd found into one comprehensive account. She'd documented the existence of the post-Civil War escape network, traced the Coopers' involvement through letters and coded photographs, connected their work to the broader history of labor exploitation in late 1800s America. But one question still haunted her. Why had Robert included the Underground Railroad symbol so prominently in the wedding photo? It was more visible than any other coded elements she'd found. There had to be a reason. She returned to Diana one cold November afternoon, wind stripping the last leaves from the oak trees. Diana welcomed her in with hot tea. They settled into their now familiar spots in the living room. "I've been thinking about the wedding photo," Sarah said. "Robert was so careful in his other work to hide evidence subtly. But that symbol on the door frame, once you know what to look for, it's unmistakable. Why would he take that risk?" Diana smiled knowingly. "I was wondering when you'd ask that. I think I know, but I wanted you to come to the question yourself." She pulled out a document Sarah hadn't seen before. A handwritten letter dated June 1887, the same month as the wedding. "This is from Robert to his brother who lived in Ohio," Diana explained. "My grandmother kept it because she said it explained everything about who Robert and Anna were." Sarah read, "Dear Charles, by the time you get this letter, Anna and I will be married. I know you've expressed concerns about the work we do, the risks we take, but I want you to understand, this marriage is not just two people who love each other joining together. It is a declaration of principle. When we stand before God and our community, we stand as people who believe freedom is not something granted by law. It's something inherent to every human soul. The door of our home will always be open to those who seek refuge. We mark it not with shame or secrecy, but with pride. Let those who have eyes to see, see. Let those who understand know where they can find help. We will not hide who we are." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. The wedding photo wasn't just documentation. It was a statement. "Exactly," Diana said softly. Robert and Anna chose to include that symbol in their wedding portrait because they wanted to declare publicly and permanently what they stood for. They knew most people wouldn't notice it, but those who needed to see it, those searching for help, they would understand, and future generations, if they looked closely enough, would know the truth. Sarah thought about David, the young man whose death had briefly silenced the Coopers but not stopped them. She thought about the dozens of faces in Robert's photos, people whose names were forgotten by official history, but who fought for their own freedom with every step they took northward. "What happened to Robert and Anna?" she asked. "How did their story end?" Diana stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. They lived into their 70s, both of them. They had 4 children. By all accounts, they were loving parents and respected community members. Robert's photography business did well. He became known for his skill and fair pricing, made him popular with working-class families. She turned back to Sarah. They never spoke publicly about what they'd done. The network they were part of gradually dissolved in the late 1890s. Legal reforms slowly improved conditions for workers, though not nearly enough or fast enough, but they never regretted it. My grandmother said Anna told her near the end of her life, she and Robert had simply done what their faith required: welcome the stranger, shelter the vulnerable, stand against injustice. Sarah closed her laptop, feeling the weight of everything she'd learned. Diana, this story needs to be told, not just in an academic journal, but widely. People need to know the fight for freedom didn't end in 1865, and that ordinary people like Robert and Anna risked everything to continue that fight. I agree, Diana said firmly. That's why I shared everything with you. My grandmother made me promise something, that if the right person ever came asking the right questions, I should tell them everything. I believe you're that person, Dr. Chen. Over the following months, Sarah worked with the museum. They created an exhibition titled Hidden in Plain Sight: The Post-Civil War Underground Railroad in Illinois. The centerpiece was the 1887 wedding photograph, displayed on a huge screen. Visitors could zoom in and discover the symbol on the doorframe themselves. Experience the same shock of recognition Sarah had felt. The exhibition included documents from Diana's folder, enlargements of Robert's railroad photos showing workers' faces, detailed explanations of the debt peonage system, the system that trapped thousands of black workers in the decades after freedom. But Sarah insisted on something else: a wall dedicated to David and the others, those who risked everything to escape exploitation. Though most of their full names were lost to history, their faces were there, captured in Robert's photos, displayed with dignity, each captioned simply, "Freedom Seeker, 1880s, 1890s. The exhibition opened in March 2025. On the anniversary of the passage of the 13th Amendment, Diana attended, now 81 years old, walking slowly through the galleries with Sarah at her side. They stopped before the wedding photo, enlarged to fill an entire wall. They would be proud, Diana said quietly, looking at the faces of her great-great-grandparents, forever young in the photograph, standing before a door marked with a symbol of hope and resistance. They should be remembered, Sarah replied, not as heroes necessarily, but as people who saw injustice and chose to act, even when it was dangerous, even when the law was against them. That's a legacy worth preserving. As visitors moved through the exhibition, many stopped before the wedding photo, leaning in close to see the carved symbol for themselves. Sarah watched them, seeing their expressions change as they understood what they were looking at. A moment of ordinary happiness transformed into a declaration of extraordinary courage. The photograph Robert had taken in June 1887 had finally revealed its deepest secret. Not to condemn or shock, but to remind the world that freedom has always required vigilance, that justice has always demanded sacrifice, and that sometimes the most powerful resistance is hidden in the most ordinary moments, waiting patiently for someone to look close enough to see the truth. The door stood open in the photograph, just as Robert and Anna had kept their door open in life, a threshold between what was and what could be, marked with a symbol that meant simply and powerfully, "Here you are safe. Here you are welcome."